He ran half of Montreal from a corner table at Brasserie Sainte-Claire, and everyone in that dining room knew it. Leonora Chabot did not look up when the front door opened. She had been working the floor at Sainte-Claire for 3 years, and she had learned early that the guests who mattered most were the ones you did not stare at. You felt them enter a room before you saw them. The temperature dropped by 2 degrees. Conversations at nearby tables went quiet without anyone deciding to stop talking. Forks were set down mid-bite. She kept her eyes on her order pad. "Table 7 wants the rack of lamb medium, not medium rare," she said under her breath, sliding past the host station. And whoever told them the burgundy paired well with the bouillabaisse should be fired. Leo, Christophe, the maitre d', appeared at her elbow. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. Constantin Drac just walked in. She wrote down lamb, medium, and did not break stride. "Then seat him, Christophe." He asked for your section. Leonora stopped walking. She turned around slowly. Christophe was already retreating, which meant the decision had already been made, which meant she was standing in the middle of a busy Friday night service, holding a notepad and a fate she had not asked for, Constantin Drac. She had seen him once before, 6 months ago, across the dining room. A tall man in a charcoal suit, sitting very still while the people around him moved too quickly, laughed too loudly, tried too hard. He had the kind of face that was composed rather than handsome. Sharp jaw, deeper set eyes, the color of river water in November. He looked like a man who had made several irrevocable decisions in his life and had not lost sleep over any of them. He was sitting at table 4 now, the corner booth with the good sight lines, the one they kept clear on Friday nights, because it was understood, without anyone ever saying it out loud, that it belonged to him when he wanted it. 2 men flanked the entrance. A third sat 2 tables away, alone, nursing a glass of water he had no intention of drinking. Leonora smoothed the front of her apron. She was not a small woman. She had made peace with that fact in increments over the years. Not all at once, not gracefully, but in the stubborn, private way that most truces are reached. She had hips that announced themselves walking into a room. Her uniform was fitted because she refused to wear anything that swam on her, refused to take up less space than she occupied. She was 29 years old, and she had been trying to disappear since she was 14, and she had finally, quietly, decided she was done with that particular project. Still, Constantin Drac's table. She walked over. He did not look up immediately. He was reading something on his phone with the focused disinterest of a man who read things not because they pleased him, but because they needed to be read. His second man, the one seated at the table with him, younger, sandy-haired, sat with his hands folded and watched Leonora approach the way a dog watches a door. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome to Brasserie Sainte-Claire. Can I start you gentlemen off with something from the bar?" Drac looked up. His eyes moved over her face first, then, unhurriedly, without apology, downward. It was not the look of a man who found her attractive. It was the look of a man cataloguing information. She had been looked at that way before, and she recognized it for what it was. The moment someone decided what category to put you in. "You're the one Christophe assigned," he said. His voice was low and measured, faint trace of an Eastern European accent, worn smooth by years and intention. "I am." He considered this. Then, "What's your name?" "Leonora." "How long have you worked here, Leonora?" 3 years. "Then you know what I drink." It was not a question. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second before turning to his companion. "And for you, sir?" She took the order. She walked back to the bar. She did not let herself exhale until she was around the corner. Thierry, the bartender, raised an eyebrow. Drac! And he asked if I knew what he drank. She set the pad down. "Single malt, neat, the Dalmore 18. No ice. Table water on the side, still, not sparkling." Thierry blinked. "How did you know that?" "I listened when he was here in March. I always listen." She carried the drinks back herself, set them down without ceremony. Drac picked up his glass without looking at her, which was fine. Which was, in fact, the best possible outcome. She had served powerful men before, and had learned that the goal was to be competent enough to be invisible. She was almost back to the host station when she heard his voice. "The glass is wrong." She stopped, turned. He was holding the tumbler up, examining it against the candlelight, with the critical patience of a man who had all evening and intended to use it. "The Dalmore 18 should be served in a wide-bowl Glencairn," he said. "Not a rocks glass. Whoever trained you did you a disservice." Around them, 2 nearby tables went quiet. Leonora walked back. She looked at the glass in his hand. She looked at him. "The brasserie uses rocks glasses for neat pours," she said. "It's a house standard. I can request a Glencairn from the bar, but I want to be transparent. We have 2 in stock and they're typically reserved for the whiskey flights. If you'd prefer to wait while I locate one, I'm happy to do that." Drac set the glass down. "Or," she continued, "you could drink a 17-year-old single malt that costs $400 a bottle and enjoy it regardless of the vessel. I've found the whiskey tastes the same either way." The sandy-haired man across the table made a sound that he immediately converted into a cough. Drac looked at her for a long moment. Not with anger. She would have known how to handle anger. With something more careful than that, something that felt like recalibration. "Bring me the Glencairn," he said. Of course. She found both Glencairns. She washed one herself at the back of the bar rather than trust that it had been properly dried. She carried it out and poured the transfer table side, not because she had to, but because it was correct. She did not look at him when she set it down. He said nothing. For the next 40 minutes, she ran her section the way she always did, smoothly, without drama, anticipating refills before they were requested, intercepting the lamb before it went to the wrong table, steering a couple at table 9 gently away from the special they'd regret. She had a gift for reading rooms, always had. It was the same skill that had made her good at numbers in school, good at noticing patterns where others saw noise. She watched, she catalogued, she moved accordingly. She did not watch table 4 any more than necessary. At 43 minutes past the hour, one of the men at the entrance stepped forward and said something quietly into the ear of Drac's companion. The companion stood. Drac remained seated unhurried, but his posture shifted in a way that most people would not have noticed. Leonora noticed. She was at the service station, entering an order, and she did not make the mistake of looking directly at the door. She looked at the reflection in the decorative mirror panel to her left instead. 3 men had come in. Not through the front, through the side corridor that connected to the private dining room. They were moving with the controlled, deliberate speed of people who had rehearsed this. The maitre was not at his post. The sommelier was backing away from table 2 with his hands visible. The sandy-haired man at table 4 reached into his jacket. Time did several things at once. Leonora set down her order pad. She picked up the heavy ceramic bread bowl from the service station, the one that weighed approximately 4 kilograms, and was shaped, at the base, like a very convincing blunt instrument. She was not a violent person. She had never thrown a punch in her life. She had also grown up in a neighborhood in Verdun, where you learned early that the moment you decided to wait for someone else to act was usually the moment things got irreversibly worse. She moved left, around the column, positioning herself between Drac's table and the man leading the 3-person approach. The man's attention was on Drac. It was not on her. This was a mistake he would have time to reconsider later. The ceramic bowl connected with the side of his head with a sound that she would later describe, to no one, as deeply unpleasant. He went sideways into a table. Leonora was already turning, because she had 2 seconds at most before his colleagues recalculated. She did not know who fired the shot. She knew it came from behind her, and she knew it hit the mirror panel to the left of where she'd been standing, and the sound of it was so much louder than she'd expected that her ears began ringing immediately. and she dropped flat to the floor, because that was what you did. And she lay there on the cold tile of Brasserie Sainte Claire, with her cheek pressed against the grout lines, and thought, quite clearly, I am going to need a very different job. It was over in under 2 minutes. She knew because she counted. When she lifted her head, Drax's men had the 2 remaining intruders on the floor. One of them was making a sound that suggested he would not be getting up quickly. The dining room was empty. The other guests had been moved or had fled. She wasn't sure which. It had happened fast. The sommelier was still standing against the wall with his hands visible, which suggested he had done the right thing, and she respected him for it. Drac was standing. He was looking at her. She pushed herself up from the floor. Her uniform had grout dust on the knee. Her notepad was somewhere she couldn't identify. She became aware, slowly, that her hands were shaking, not from fear, or not only from fear, but from the adrenaline that had nowhere left to go. "Are you hurt?" he said. His voice was different, not warmer exactly. Stripped of something, maybe. The performance of disinterest. "No," she said. "I don't think so." He crossed the distance between them in 4 steps and looked at her with the same cataloguing attention as before, except that this time it was not dismissive. He checked her face, her hands, a cut on her forearm. She hadn't felt until he looked at it. "From the glass panel," she said, glancing down. "It's not deep." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "You hit Marchetti in the head with a bread bowl." "I did. Marchetti," he said with particular emphasis, "has broken 3 men's arms for looking at him wrong." "He wasn't looking at me," Leonora said. "That was the problem." Drac stared at her. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not a smile, nothing as approachable as that, but the distant cousin of one. A recognition, perhaps. The slight adjustment a man makes when he has put something in the wrong category and is quietly correcting the filing. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working. Leonora." He said her name with 3 clean syllables, like a word in another language being pronounced correctly for the first time. "Sit down." She sat down at table 4, because her legs, frankly, were not objecting to the suggestion. He sat across from her. His jacket was undamaged. She found this improbable. He produced, from somewhere, a clean white cloth and held it toward her without touching her. She pressed it against the cut on her arm. "How long have you known?" he said. "Known what? That someone was going to make a move tonight." She considered lying. She was good at lying. She had grown up in a household where it was a survival skill, not a moral failure. But she looked at Drac and concluded, practically, that lying to this man was the kind of inefficiency she could not afford right now. "I didn't know," she said. "I noticed. There's a difference." "What did you notice?" "Your man at the door changed his weight distribution at 8:41. He went from casual lean to something else, like he'd heard something through his earpiece that made him reassess. And the sommelier was steered away from table 2 before he got there, which meant someone had told him to stay clear, which meant someone expected a disruption in that quadrant. She paused, and the reservation on table 6 was a name I'd never heard, which is unusual on a Friday, and they left before their mains arrived, which means they were never there for dinner. Drac looked at her without speaking for a long moment. "You're a waitress," he said. "I'm a person who is very good at paying attention," she said, "who currently works as a waitress. Those are related but not identical things." He picked up his whiskey, which had survived the entire incident upright on the table, which she thought said something about the construction of the base. He drank, set it down. "Before this," he said, "what did you do before this? Forensic accounting? 2 years. At a firm downtown, 1 year before that at Revenue Canada." She kept her voice even. "I left." "Why?" She looked at the cloth pressed against her arm. "Because I noticed things I wasn't supposed to notice, and when I mentioned them to the people I was supposed to mention them to, nothing happened. And I realized I had 2 options. I could continue noticing things in an environment that would eventually become uncomfortable for me, or I could go somewhere quieter. A restaurant, she did not say, had seemed quieter. Drac was quiet for a moment. Then, what did you notice? At Revenue Canada, yes. She met his eyes. Are you asking because you're worried I noticed something about you? No, he said. I'm asking because I want to know what kind of accountant notices things. The careful kind, she said. The kind that does not announce it. He nodded once, slowly. The way men nod when they have been given an answer that is precisely what they were looking for and are not ready to say so yet. Leonora became aware, gradually, that the ringing in her ears had subsided, that the dining room was still, that there was dried blood, minimal, on the inside of her left wrist, that Constantin Drac was watching her with an expression she did not have a word for, exactly. Something between appraisal and something older and more careful than that. The glass comment, she said. Earlier, the rocks glass. He waited. You weren't actually bothered by the glass. He said nothing. You were testing whether I'd apologize, she said. Whether I'd fold, whether you could read me that way. She kept her voice matter of fact. Most people apologize. Most people are very eager to apologize to men like you. And you are not most people, he said. I am a person who has spent 15 years being told, in various ways, that I should take up less space, she said. I'm done performing smallness for people who haven't earned it. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that forms when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, and both people are deciding what to do with it. Drac set his glass down. I want to show you something, he said. He slid a card across the table. Matte black, no logo, just a number embossed in silver. She looked at it. I have a position, he said. Financial oversight. The person who held it previously made the mistake of assuming I wouldn't look carefully at the columns that didn't add up. What happened to him? He retired, Drac said, in a tone that suggested retirement had come abruptly and without a pension party. And you want me? I want someone who notices things, he said, and who does not announce it until the moment it matters. He glanced toward the doorway where Marchetti had recently been horizontal. You've demonstrated both. Leonora looked at the card. She looked at the dining room, which was going to need significant attention from a cleaning crew. She looked at the cut on her arm, which had stopped bleeding. I'll think about it, she said. Most people don't tell me they'll think about it. Most people, she said, apparently apologize about Rock's glasses. For the second time that evening, something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The architectural suggestion of one. Call the number, he said. When you've thought about it, he stood, adjusted his cuffs. He was leaving as if a dining room had not just been the site of an armed confrontation, as if she had not just hit one of his known enemies unconscious with baked goods, as if everything were completely ordinary, and she found, sitting there at table 4, with his card between her fingers, that she was not as surprised by this as she probably should have been. He paused at the edge of the table. Leonora. She looked up. The Glencairn, he said. You were right. The whiskey tasted the same. And then he was gone, and his men were gone, and the dining room was very quiet, and Christoph appeared from somewhere, looking like a man who needed a drink immediately, and was surrounded by several $1,000s of inventory, and did not feel entitled to any of it. Leonora set the card down on the table. She picked it up again. She put it in her apron pocket. She called the number 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, standing on her balcony in Rosemont, with a coffee she hadn't tasted yet, and a clear view of the rooftops going orange in the early light. The phone rang twice. Drach. It's Leonora Sabo, she said. I've thought about it. A pause, brief, controlled. And I have conditions. Of course you do, he said, not with irritation, with something that might have been, under enough layers of careful concealment, relief. She started with the salary. He agreed without negotiating, which meant she had started too low, which meant next time she would start higher. She filed this away. She told him she would not sign anything that made her complicit in activities she could not legally defend. He said that was fine. She said she would need a private workspace and full access to the books, all of them, not a sanitized version. He said that could be arranged. One more thing, she said. Yes, I'm not going to pretend not to notice things, she said. I did that for 2 years at the firm, and it made me bad at my job and worse at sleeping. If I see something, I'm going to say it. He was quiet for a moment. That, he said, is the entire reason I'm hiring you. She started on a Monday. His office was on the 14th floor of a building in Old Montreal that officially housed a property management firm and unofficially housed the administrative infrastructure of the DRAC organization, which had its hands in freight, in private lending, in 3 legitimate restaurants, and in at least 4 things Leonora identified in her first week that she catalogued without commenting on yet, because she needed to understand them fully before she said anything. He was not there every day. When he was, he worked in a manner she had not expected from a man of his reputation. Quietly, thoroughly, with an attention to detail that suggested he had not always had people to do things for him and had not forgotten how to do them himself. She did not go out of her way to interact with him. She did not avoid it either. She asked questions when she had them. She delivered answers when she found them. She was professional. She noticed over the first 2 weeks that he shifted his route through the office so that it passed her workstation. She noticed that the coffee in the small kitchen was restocked with the particular brand she'd mentioned once, in passing, to no one she thought was listening. She noticed that when she worked late, which was often because the books were genuinely interesting and she had not felt genuinely interested in a long time, the building's overnight security protocol was quietly extended to include her floor, even though the standard protocol ended at 10. She did not mention any of this. She mentioned it to herself internally, in the way she always processed things she was not ready to act on. It was 5 weeks in when he appeared in the doorway of her office at 7:40 in the evening, with 2 containers of take-it from a Vietnamese place 2 blocks over, and said, without preamble, "You haven't eaten." "I was going to." The kitchen closed at 6. He set one of the containers on the edge of her desk. "I checked." She looked at the container. She looked at him. He was still in his jacket, which he never removed in the office, which she had initially read as cold formality and had since revised to habitual guardedness, which were different things. "You checked," she said. "The restaurant, not your eating habits, though the latter is also of concern." She opened the container. It was fur, and it was the correct fur, the kind with tendon and tripe that most people ordered wrong because they weren't paying attention to the menu. She had mentioned this once, 3 weeks ago. To a colleague she was barely sure he knew existed. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I'm aware." He sat down in the chair across from her desk, not in the way a boss sits down, not to review something, just sitting, with no agenda she could identify. She found this unsettling in a way that had nothing to do with threat and everything to do with the fact that she did not have a category for it. "The numbers in the freight ledger," she said, because she had to say something, because she was better at problems than she was at this. "The Q3 variance. It's not an error. I know. Someone's been running a secondary account through the Laval routing, small enough to miss quarter over quarter, but the pattern's clear if you look at 18 months. "I know," he said again. She looked up. "You knew? I suspected. I couldn't find it." He met her eyes. "You found it in 11 days. She was quiet. "I should tell you," he said, "that the reason the position was open was not entirely because of the previous accountant's retirement. I gathered. It has been open for 4 months. I interviewed 9 people." He paused. "None of them found the variance. Because they were looking at quarters," she said. "You have to look at 18 months. You have to look at the shape of the thing, not just the numbers." He nodded, the same nod as before in the restaurant, slow, deliberate, the nod of a man updating a file he keeps somewhere very private. "Leonora," he said. She waited. "I owe you an apology." She set her chopsticks down. "The rock's glass," he said, "and before that, the way I looked at you when you came to the table." He said this the way he said most things, evenly, without decoration, which somehow made it worse and better simultaneously. "I was assessing whether you were someone I needed to manage or someone I needed to dismiss. I was not looking at you correctly." She held very still. "I look at everyone that way," he said. "It is a habit I developed at an age when it was necessary. It is not a habit I am proud of when it is directed at someone who has done nothing to invite it." "You were testing me," she said. "I told you that. I was, and you were right. And the fact that you were right, and that you said so without flinching, is also something I am not accustomed to." He looked at her steadily. "I am telling you this because you deserve to hear it, not because I expect you to do anything with it." She picked up her chopsticks again. She ate a mouthful of fur. She thought about Verdun and Revenue Canada, and 15 years of trying to be smaller than she was, and the dining room at St. Clair, and the way a Glencairn glass felt different from a Rock's glass, even when the whiskey was identical. "For what it's worth," she said finally, "you also passed a test." He raised an eyebrow. Almost imperceptible. On him it was practically theatrical. "When I hit Marchetti," she said, "you didn't pull me back. You didn't tell me to get down or get out of the way. You let me act." She tilted her head. "Most men in your position would have managed me, moved me aside, made the decision that I was something to be protected rather than something that could help." She looked at him directly. "You didn't?" "No," he said. "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because you had already read the room better than my men had," he said, and it seemed like poor management to override someone who clearly knew what they were doing. She nodded, ate another bite. "Also," he said very quietly, "I did not want anything to happen to you." The office was still. Outside, Montreal did what Montreal always did at this hour, hummed and glittered and carried on without asking permission. Leonora Sabo looked at Constantine Drac across the desk, that she had arranged precisely to her specifications, in an office on the 14th floor of a building that was not what it appeared to be, in a job that was not what she had planned for herself, in a life that had taken turns she had not mapped, and had survived every one of them. "Finish your dinner," she said. "Then I'll show you what I found in the Laval account. All of it." He picked up his container. She showed him all of it. It took 2 hours, and he did not interrupt once, which she recognized from long experience, as the clearest possible signal that someone was actually listening. When she was done, he looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "You're going to be a problem," he said. She shut her laptop. "Yes," she said. "I know." And the way he said it, low and even, and with the faintest edge of something that was not complaint, told her that this was not a warning but an admission, from a man who had not admitted things easily in a very long time, and that it was, in every way that mattered, exactly what she had been hoping to hear.